Welcome to Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations. I'm Brian Russell, and today I'm really privileged to have as a guest my good friend Gene Yotka of the Awakening Institute. Gene's a retired licensed local pastor in the United Methodist Church. He served multiple congregations around Florida. He's presently the founder and director of the Awakening Institute and serves as a spiritual director and produces lots of outstanding content for persons who are interested in spirituality. Gene, welcome to my show, and thanks for being my very first guest.
Thank you, Brian. It's a privilege to be here.
And I'm gonna time stamp this just so folks are listening down the road. We're right in the middle of essentially the lockdown from spring of 2020 with the COVID-19 virus. And so we will touch on that later, but I did want to just remind people of the context out of which this episode's being recorded. So without kind of further ado, let's jump into some questions, Gene. And what drew you, first of all, to contemplative spirituality, and how was that important and formative for your own life?
What I think I've always been drawn to it. Ever since even as a young child, I sensed I sensed that there was something more, something deeper, and I started pursuing that from through reading and through study and through seminary, through various programs, and I discovered that there's a sense of the mystery that I just love. The mysterious, the mystical, and the contemplative understanding that we truly can experience God in the here and now, without. It's so different than our typical Western view of spirituality, where God is someone to placate, or God is someone out there, or God is someone that if we follow the right rules that and we kind of toe the line and go to church and do all the right things, that somehow we get our way to heaven. And it just I found it was just so unbiblical, so opposite of what the Bible really said, that we're called to have this deep dive spirituality. Like you said, we should have this understanding that that God is truly with us, that we truly as Christians live, move, and have our being in Christ Jesus. And there was always been this sense, even before I became a Christian, back when I was a teenager, I always sensed the depth. There was more, and as I came in and I learned and became a pastor and spiritual director, I think the spiritual direction the study of spiritual direction really kind of brought me into that place where I started saying that sense that I've always had, that feeling there was more, was something that truly was accessible to us. So it wasn't. I can't pinpoint a time when I said, "Oh, I think I'm going to do." I think contemplative spirituality, the contemplative walk is for me. I think I've always been there. It kind of developed, and I think I was brought to a place where I truly understood that it was possible. Whereas so much of the teaching, I don't think I've ever heard teaching in a church that actually said it wasn't possible, but it seemed to imply that's not what it was all about. And then the more I read the scriptures, the more I looked into the reality of God with us, the reality of this love relationship with God, the more I realized that the contemplative way was something not only for me, but I think it's something that the church needs desperately. And and it could be a piece of that revival that we're all looking for, that sense of a newness, a freshness, perhaps a new old thing that God's always been doing that we've kind of missed for so long.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we start talking about revival, sometimes we don't hear the word contemplative spirituality in kind of the same vein. I've always found you to be a really clear thinker on this, and I've learned so much from you. I've had the privilege of taking some classes at Gene's the Awakening Institute, and he's kind of my informal spiritual director. We've never formalized that, but I definitely pick his brain. He's helped me so much over these last couple of years. And one of the things that I thought you've done really well is you use the letter S. Obviously, S is spirituality, but you have 5 S's that allow you to kind of frame out what contemplative spirituality is all about and spiritual formation. Can you share that kind of schema that you use and explain each one briefly? So especially if, for persons who are listening that may not completely understand what we're talking about, how do those 5 S's help you to share what contemplation, what spirituality really is?
Yeah, I'd love to. Over the millennia, if you read the contemplative writers, you read the mystical Christian writers, silence, stillness, and solitude have been kind of a core aspect of virtually everybody in various ways, and they understood it in different ways. But that you can't go too far in the spiritual reading of the contemplatives and the mystics without seeing those. And as I was learning about those, I kind of couched that in if you want to call it a context of simplicity and in spaciousness. And so my schema, if you want to call it that, which again, this wasn't something that I said, oh, these 5 S's would be really cool and they might be a nice alliteration to be able to help people understand it. It kind of turned out that way, but it really came together piece by piece. And it actually started with the understanding of solitude for me, and then silence, and the sense of stillness, and then the simplicity and spaciousness kind of came in. But as I'm teaching it now, I feel like simplicity is something that we really need to begin with. I think it's important because it ties directly to the contemplative notion of detachment, of allowing us to not let the things of the world direct us to. And I'm not talking about necessarily becoming a total ascetic where we go into the desert and we forget everything. I'm just saying that we need to simplify our lives to the point where we aren't being so focused and our thoughts aren't so constantly on things of the world, if you want to use that term. And even when they are, we're not attached to it. We don't. It's fine to enjoy things. It's even fine to have a nice home, a nice car, or whatever people may want to have. But I think simplicity allows us to be detached, and of course that does come down to how we handle our finances, how we handle different things. Do we get in over our heads? Or are we allowing ourselves to truly be detached spiritually? And if we have something that we think we can't do without, we need to get rid of it. If it's something, it's fine to have something, but if you can't do without it, it's something that, and that includes virtually everything, and except for the centering. As you know, I practice centering prayer and the centering on Christ Jesus and keeping that. So first is simplicity that ties to that concept of detachment. Then now I think if we move to a place of stillness, stillness is usually what I teach second, and stillness simply means that we are now at a place where we truly internalize, not my will but your will, Lord. And even further, we say, Lord, may your will become my will. And in that place of stillness, we become those who have no longer continued to grasp. We're not grasping things any longer. Again, things may come our way, and they may come very naturally, and they may even feed our spirituality. But we're no longer trying to climb the corporate ladder, for example. But we could be desiring that, but it doesn't become something we're constantly grasping for. We're not trying to. So the stillness helps in that way. And then the silence. Once we come to a place there in the silence, we can truly begin to do what most of us don't do very well, and that's to listen. We can become Elijah on the mountain, where we truly can understand that we can hear God's voice in the sheer silence. That always fascinated me, that verse where, how do you hear anything in sheer silence? And but of course it's that spiritual sense of being able to truly stop and be a contemplative listener, be someone, a with God listener, someone who can truly be in that place where you don't have, you're detached from things of the world. You're still, you're not trying to impose and grasp, and you're now in a place where you can just allow yourself to be quiet and be able to listen, and not only listen, but hear God. And a big part that I like to always bring out in that part is that we aren't just there at that point, because the silence now brings us to what's called contemplation in action. So now when we listen, we respond. to what we're hearing. And it's an interesting thing because we really can't, and unless we become Christians that are willing to listen, who are really willing to listen to God, we're really going about, we could be doing wonderful things, but are they really God's will? Are we're really kind of going out in ignorance if we don't sit with the Lord in that silent time. And of course, if we do sit with the Lord in silent time, then we do nothing, which has been kind of the rap on mystical contemplative, the contemplative way. Then we're really disobedient, aren't we? Then we're not really doing what, or we're not listening. We're just sitting there and we're making it an exercise. And so we move through that silence, and then we come to a place of solitude. And solitude is that point where we truly learn to be present. And we're present in such a way that it isn't present only in a time of isolation. I wrote some of this in my last newsletter that just came out. It's all about solitude. And it isn't just saying, I'm going to get away because I've had enough of these people and I have enough of this world and I'm going crazy and I need quiet time. That may spur it, but that's not the point of solitude. Solitude, we go and we practice it, and usually, and recommended, we do go to a quiet place. We find a retreat place. We go and we sit, but we go there not to just enter into solitude while we're there, and then when we leave solitude behind and go. We bring it into the world, and I really believe that if we practice solitude, we can come to a place where that peace and that sense we may feel on a retreat, or we might feel in that quiet place when we intentionally practice it. We could feel it and we could live it in the midst of Times Square on New Year's Eve. You can have a million people around you, and the awesome thing about it is it isn't, again, even in the midst of the people, it's not isolation. It's being truly present. It's being truly present to God, to ourselves, to others, and even all creation. And we start sensing, and which is really it's kind of the contemplative is hungry and desires and seeks, but in a passive way that is also active. I know I'm starting to sound, but it's a paradox, and we begin to understand this as something that we truly can allow ourselves to be in the presence of God and be connected in Christ Jesus. As Christians, we truly feel the interconnection between us and God, between one another, and I can sense a connection right now between us, and so this sense of connection now becomes something that we take into every day of our lives. So solitude becomes a personal, inner solitude, but then it moves forward to, and I like to think that it moves forward into our Christian communities. We need to practice this in the midst of our communities and truly practice unity and practice ways that we don't bring the divisions and the controversies. Thomas Merton wrote that he said there's one thing that a contemplative disdains, and that's controversy. And he doesn't mean, if you read any Merton, he has no problem speaking things, but what he means is that controversy does not affect our spirituality. It doesn't affect our presence with God. And then we can enter into a place of spaciousness, and that's the fifth S. Is that the spaciousness is it's fleeting, and I'm not sure if we can live there all the time, but there's a sense of the infinite God that we can enter into this it's not even a location. It's a falling. It's allowing ourselves just to experience without walls, experience the infinity of God that is beyond what we typically do. Because once we do that, then we let all the barriers and all the walls that we typically put up between us and God and one another, they melt away. They're gone. But I think as we move there, and that seems to be the real struggle for anyone really, to be able to sense that, move from that interconnectedness and feel that, but then just rest in the, if you want to call it, the holy silence or the holy stillness or the holy solitude, the holy, even holy simplicity, the holy mystery of a holy God. So those are the S's in a nutshell that I talk about a lot.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And as we try to bring that to a practical level, again, not that that's not practical. I didn't mean it exactly that way, but what's the blocks that we might feel in our lives that would prevent maybe many people from embracing any of those five, let alone taking on the whole piece? What are some common blocks that you've observed that people run into that prevent them from, I think your book, you have the book, what is it, being known as, or no,
Knowing as we are known. Yeah.
yeah, knowing as we are known. And I love that title, that idea that God in these five S's, I get to the point where I accept the fact that I'm unconditionally accepted by God, that I'm fully known, and then that allows communion. So in a sense, obviously one of the blocks is going to be the blocks that we put up on ourselves, not being able to fully receive God's grace. But to kind of break that down, what have you found are some blocks or some mindsets or just incorrect thoughts that keep people from experiencing this true abundance that really God, I think, is inviting all God's people to experience?
Yeah, I think there's several, and we could talk a lot about this, but I think that um, there's a default deism that Christians seem to use, and I mean, I know we don't teach that, and we're told to be careful with that and all that, but we have a tendency to compartmentalize God, to allow God to be, maybe in our Sunday morning, or be in our prayer time, or in our Bible study, and then we go about our lives, and I think we haven't been taught, or we've forgotten how to live uh, Emmanuel, live God with us moment by moment. But I really think the key is complexity. We've made our lives so complex, and I'm not even. I think that we need to definitely simplify our world. We take on too many things, and I learned this personally. But this is something that I went through, because I always wanted to have 20 projects in the air, and I always wanted to be this this person who is kind of getting things done, and I sat one day. This is many years ago, but I sat one day and I just said, this is there's so many distractions from what I think God really wants me to do. One of the reasons I retired early from pastoral ministry in the church is because, and I'm not saying this for everybody, but for me personally, the church itself was too many distractions. There was too many meetings. There was too much of this other stuff going on, and uh, and I discovered that the people I think that I was most effective with were the people that were becoming more simple, less complex. But it isn't just taking and simplifying the world around us. It's taking our inner selves. Most of us we have no idea the complexity of our thoughts. We have no idea the complexity of who we truly, the way we're really thinking. We have inner critics. We have this sense of guilt. We have this sense of shame. We find ourselves so often thinking of the things of the past and the what ifs, and worried about the future, and we create this incredible complexity in things that we can do nothing about. We can't do anything about what happened in the past. We really don't have any control over the future. All we can do is live in the now. So a lot of I think if Christians can learn to simplify and begin to just take that deep breath every once in a while, I believe that the Lord is speaking to every one of us all the time. And I also believe that there's certain times during the day, maybe several times during the day, where the Lord is telling us to stop, to just stop. And being a person who practices centering prayer, my sacred word, if you want to call it that, is Jesus. And I believe that when we say that sacred word with real intention, with a sense, then we are saying, Lord, make me aware of your presence and your action within me and around me. And we just don't do that. And that would simplify our lives tremendously if we would just allow ourselves. But you need to be simple. You need to simplify to be able to hear it. It doesn't mean that God's not speaking to us, but we need to simplify our lives. Otherwise, we're not going to hear it. And then we're not going to be able to stop. And then we're not going to be able to take that deep breath. We're not going to be able to say Jesus in that way. We're not going to know the presence and action of God within us. And we're not going to be able to stop and just listen. And now enter into that time of silence and stillness, silence and solitude. Uh, And I think that's why the Lord has led me to take those three really perennial components, those components that every Christian contemplative, really every contemplative, almost every tradition of stillness, solitude, and silence, or stillness, silence, and solitude, and then kind of couch it in that simplicity and spaciousness. So that's kind of a long way, but I think complexity, if we can address our complexity, and we can address the notion that God is with us sometimes and not with us other times, I think we can go a long way to moving toward this with God experience, and to ultimately to become canonic vessels, the vessels that let love go, that receive love and let love flow us through us and into the world all the time, every single moment, which is what the contemplative life is really all about.
And the way you describe it, just it's really beautiful. And I can imagine that persons listening to this are thinking, okay, how can I experience that? How can I move through the complexity of my own life? What's it look like to actually embrace these practices? If if you're not doing it already, one of my favorite quotations. I don't know where it comes from. It's some wisdom tradition. They always say the best time to plant a shade tree was 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a shade tree is right now. So for those who, again, this may be completely new, or maybe it's persons who did this in the past but have kind of lapsed. If you were going to give advice, like someone's coming to you for direction now and they're looking for how can I begin even today, like after I stop listening to this conversation, what would be what you would consider, let's just say, starter practices? Again, I'm very pragmatic, so I hate to offend every spiritual director on the planet by saying that, but what would be some go-to starter practices that we can begin to embrace this deeper life with God that then can fuel us for mission, for being present, for actually giving outstanding customer service if we're in the in the secular world, to help pastors who are feeling burned out? I mean, what are some next steps? What would be some go-to practices that the folks listening to this could start like right now?
Well, it's what I'm going to say is incredibly counterintuitive, because we always want to do, get done, done, done. Uh, I would say just stop, 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 and rest, become quiet. And then I would pick up a practice that's become part of my rule of life, and I know it's yours as well, Brian, is a centering prayer. I would find a way to learn. It's simple, but difficult at the same time. It's a way to be able to enter into that undistracted way. But I would say we need to take, and I mean, we're in the midst of this virus, and so many people are quarantined right now, and so many of us are not doing the things we would normally do. Even retired, I'm not going to the restaurants that I would normally go to. I'm not visiting the churches that I normally would have done. I'm not going out and teaching classes like I normally would be doing right now. So what's it give me? It gives me time. It gives me time to stop. And I've been practicing this for a long time, just so I know as you as well. But this, and it's going to sound strange, I guess, to some, is that this period where we really have no choice has become rich for me. It's become something where I can, I can, and it took me a minute. It took me more than a minute. It took me a metaphorical minute that said, that I had to say, wow, look at this opportunity that we have, that we can just stop. And I think that once you begin to do that, Gerald Mays wrote a great book, Into the Wilderness, and he calls it going into the slowing. And we just allow ourselves to enter into that slowing. Just take a deep breath. Don't try to, I mean, eventually as a spiritual director, I do recommend centering prayer, or the prayer of examine. We recommend, the prayer of quiet. We recommend Lectio Divina, these different things, but I wouldn't even start with that. I would just start with stopping. Become quiet. Close your eyes, find a comfortable spot in your house, and even if your mind is all over the place, just begin to teach yourself, spirit, soul, mind, and body, to stop. First, your body's going to stop. Then, hopefully, your mind will it'll slow down. And then you'll find that your soul will become, And then you can sense that in your spirit, deep down, where the Holy Spirit, immersed human spirit, is in a place that is perfectly still. Because this is a strange thing about what we're talking about, is that every single one of us already have it. We don't have to, this is not something we have to try to accomplish. This is not something we're trying to, oh, I've got to learn this and learn that. No, we've already have it. We're trying to become aware of it. We already have simplicity. God is one. That's, I mean, God, we have this sense of stillness, this sense of stillness. Be still and know that I'm God. It's there already. It's in our spirits. We have this sense of being silent, like Elijah on the mountain, as I said earlier. We have a sense of being in solitude, because the truth is that the contemplative is interested in being their true naked self in the midst of the one who truly is. And then we just we can just take that deep breath, and we can fall into the spaciousness, the mystery. And I think maybe because we always want to try to figure things out, and you know, uh, most of us are not that thrilled with mystery. We want to know what's going to happen every single minute, but in the mystery of God, we can just rest in that. And so the stopping, will just allow yourself. That'll be the very beginning, and then then you can incorporate centering prayer or lectio, or one of the other contemplative practices that best fit your your personality and the people and the person who you are. And that's where a spiritual director comes in. A spiritual director, you don't need a spiritual director to stop, by the way. You don't need a spiritual director to you just go inward, and you'll find everything you need. You may need a spiritual director to kind of tease some of those things, to try and help you hear some of those things, to help you better hear God, and to learn some of these practices. But that's the beginning. I would simply say stop.
Yeah, and that's good. And that's, that's just like so many things in life. Sometimes the answers are simple, but they're not necessarily easy. And then, I mean, we could
That's
go
true.
right back through and take another cycle and talk about blocks, because once you stop, and we don't have time to tease this out. This is probably going to have to be another conversation, but stopping actually brings up its own things that God will work out in our own lives too.
Absolutely.
But you started
Absolutely.
talking about spiritual direction and the role that it plays. I know for me, um, I think one of the shifts that I've made in my own life as I've tried to explore what I like to call deep dive spirituality is going through a period of life where you sort of become certainly uncertain or uncertainly certain, and many Christians bounce back and forth between being uncertain or certain, and we think that we need absolute certainty, and we study philosophy and all these different things, and then what you run into with that is just bouncing back and forth, or in a sense you embrace the mystery and majesty of God. And I know for myself, the idea of spiritual direction at that point was really helpful to kind of in a sense give me a space where it could be 100% honest, where I could share my questions about certainty, uncertainty, mystery, and be there along the way, in a sense that you don't drop off into the abyss of lost faith or whatever. And there's lots of people that are listening. I've noticed more and more, and I know that you have in your work, that there's a real spiritual struggle and hunger. And some people are in some ways leaving the Christian faith or becoming much more agnostic simply because they don't have the resources to grasp the greatness of who God is in Jesus Christ through the power of the Spirit. And so, not to put spiritual directors on a real pedestal, but in a sense, how do you see your role as a spiritual director, and how can a spiritual director actually help someone, whether they're really just trying to take the next step in their spiritual journey, or maybe they're actually really struggling with some difficult questions? So, talk a little bit about your work as a spiritual director and how that might be a resource for people.
Yeah, spiritual direction is interesting. Is that it's a piece of the maybe call it the human essence puzzle. We have our doctors, we have our medical doctors, we have our psychologists, good Christian psychologists, psychiatrists, and they're key. But we so often we forget about the spirit. We have the spirit, soul, mind, and body, and the spiritual director, which is actually a misnomer, even the term, because we don't really direct anything. The Holy Spirit is the director. And what we do is we help people to, as you had said, hopefully give them safe, even help them sense sacred space where they can hear and listen to the Lord. A lot of what I'll do is I'll listen. I'll try to listen well, and then just have maybe a good couple open-ended questions, and they're always directed at how are you hearing God in this, or how are you not hearing God in this? How are you attuned to God's guidance within the context of whatever the situation is? Because spiritual direction is not, it's not issue oriented. It's life oriented. It's a sense of just how are you experiencing God's presence in your life. Now, someone to benefit from spiritual direction has to believe that God is actually present. That that we truly that we have this access by God's grace to be able to truly listen to God. So spiritual director is really just someone who can help someone become comfortable with the reality of presence, and develop, for lack of better words, skills, spiritual skills, which are not necessarily step-by-step skills, and they're almost never linear. They're always very dynamic. But to develop those in such a way that they can begin to hear God and respond to God's presence in a more profound and effective manner. And it's amazing to me, because we're talking about a mystery. We're talking about something that's beyond being able to even articulate. But it's amazing how, if we just will allow ourselves to enter into that space, that God will begin to speak to us. And a spiritual director, hopefully a good spiritual director, is just someone who has spent a lot of time listening, not to people, but more listening to God, so that we can hear God and we can sense God's presence in the midst. And it becomes this triangle. It isn't between the director and the directee as much as between the director and God and the directee and God. And a good spiritual director will be open to what God is speaking to, how God is speaking to them for the benefit of the person, and to be able to give maybe the right word, maybe the right just kind of nudge to be able to hear what God is saying, is speaking to them, and help them clarify that. And that's really spiritual director is the Holy Spirit is the director, and the director is just there to help clarify and to give some context for that experience with God.
How would a person know if they were ready to take that next step and maybe speak with a spiritual director, Gene? What are the signs that you're ready for that?
I don't want to sound biased here, but I think every single Christian should have a spiritual director. And I'm not saying that they don't necessarily have to be someone who's certified and trained and had all that. Some of our best spiritual directors are friends, or someone we know just kind of gets us, and someone that we know spends a lot of time with God. As a matter of fact, probably a better term for spiritual director is spiritual companion or spiritual friend. And it's a fascinating thing. And how I know this is true is that I had a friend of mine years ago who only graduated 8th grade. He didn't even go to high school. He worked in a farm for his family, and I met him when I was already well into my I was probably 20 something years old, and he was probably near 70, and I remember that this was a time where I was kind of struggling. I play guitar as well, and I was struggling with playing in clubs and doing these different things, and I decided to start taking up worship music. And the very first time I ever played one worship song in front of a congregation, I had played in front of hundreds, thousands of people. It really shouldn't have been a big deal, but I was nervous as all get out. And this uneducated person came to me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Did you pray about this?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let me pray for you now." We prayed, and then he said, "Have you prepared?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, then just play. Worship the Lord." And that's just one example. But this gentleman, because he spent so much time with God and he spent so much time in prayer, he was kind of, before the term was popular, he was a spiritual director of the congregation. Everybody went to Bill for this, how do I better hear God? How do, give me some wisdom, give me some advice. And so it isn't, it's all it is a person. This is the awesome thing about it is that every one of us can be that for someone else. I do believe in being certified. I believe in being trained, but at the same time, a spiritual director is just that person that you need to find. So to answer your question, I think that every single Christian needs a spiritual director. I've had one for years, different ones over the years, and I still always will have one. And I don't think I could be a spiritual director without having another person that kind of knows me, almost as a supervisor, to kind of supervise the direction that I'm doing with other people. So I think every single person should, in one way or another. And even though it's going to be hard to find a spiritual certified person for every single people, there's not enough. There are people in our congregations, there are people in our lives that we can turn to, and I think you said it earlier, just someone that you can share with, that you can be honest with, and someone who has spent a lot of time in prayer, a lot of time with God, and won't try to judge you, won't try to give you even something to do. We'll just give you a way to stop and take a deep breath and listen to whatever God is doing in your lives.
Yeah, that's really good. I can see why it's exciting for you to practice this and have the privilege of serving other people. I want to go ahead and wrap this up, and we can go on and talk more. And again, we'll have more conversations. But let me just ask you just a couple questions that I'm hoping to ask everybody that ends up being a guest here. First, what does your rule of life consist of? Again, some people may have see that as their daily disciplines or their morning ritual or evening ritual, but I like to use the technical word rule of life. So how do you order your day in a way that enhances your spirituality, Gene?
Well, I get up in the morning, and before I do anything, I spend a half an hour in centering prayer every single morning, and then I spend another 15 to 20 minutes in total silence, and then it's interesting because I've been doing Lectio after that for years, but now I've been doing that for the last, I think we're up to 290 times now. Every morning I'm doing a Lectio Divina through this different various scriptures, and so I do my Lectio. So that's my morning, and then around noon, 12:30 every day, I try to stop for another 15, 20 minutes, and it might be centering prayer, it might be just a quiet place just to go. And then at night, I do a prayer of examine, and I do centering prayer again for 20 minutes to half an hour. That's simple as that. That has worked for me, and it's morphed. It's different. It changes. You don't just have a rule of life, in my opinion, and that's it. Okay, you're done. It'll change over the years, and mine has changed, and I'm sure mine will change again in the future. But that's mine at this moment. And again, some people are saying, "Oh, there's a lot of time and all." I am retired, and my whole passion is to be able to help people, help myself, and help people feel God's presence. So I just spend lots of time doing that. But it can be just as effective if you're working and you have kids and you have things that need to get done. You can just have your 10 or 15 or 20 minutes of quiet time, and I love centering prayer for that. It's a great way to go about that. So that's my personal rule of life. But it's very contextualized in my life the way I am right now.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm going to ask everybody the question, because once I get a body of episodes, there is no secret, there's no perfect recipe. It's a matter of our personality, our context, our circumstances, whether we have little kids that demand our attention, our jobs. But I think I do want us to share what we do personally. So thanks for sharing that. Another question: if you could boil down your library to just let's say 2 or 3 books, and again, we're giving, you have your Bible, so we're not going to count the Bible because we know you're reading that. But if you're going to pick 2 or 3 books that you consider essential reading and that you'd want to have no matter what would those books be?
If you're in my office here, I'm surrounded between the houses about 3,000 books here.
The impossible question for all of us.
Well, it's again, I guess it would be at this moment, right?
Yes,
right now.
At this moment,
this moment, I would say, I think that everybody should read Thomas Merton's The New Seeds of Contemplation. I think it's deep, and it's something that probably you need to read through a few times, but it really gets it. Now on the other side, and this is certainly not as simple. But it's not anywhere near as deep. I would read David Steindl Rast's "The prayer is the heart of gratefulness is the heart of prayer." It's here someplace, but those two, I think that, and then I would incorporate some of my devotional time into reading the Desert Fathers and Mothers. I would read some of you can pick up books called The Sayings of the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and there's some tremendous contemplative wisdom in those books. That's just those three that I think of off the top of my head. There's probably many, many more.
Oh, thanks, Gene. And just a final question: if folks want to get in touch with you, what are some places they can find you on social media or on the web, or any kind of information? And of course, I'll post all this and some notes, either on below the video if you're watching this on YouTube, or in the write up for those listening. It's just an audio.
Yeah. The Awakening Institute is www.theawakeninginstitute.com. That's our website, and you can contact me through that, or Facebook, just Gene Yotka, and you'll be able to pick it up there. And that's where we do our devotional every morning. And then we're in Cocoa. Our mailing address is 5040 Mayflower in Cocoa, Florida, and my personal email is eugenetyotka@gmail.com, and and I'll be glad to, if anybody wants to speak about these things, I'm more than happy to do that.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, and it's a real honor to have you here as my very first guest, Gene. So it's been a privilege.
It's a blessing. It's a privilege for me.
All right. Well, until next time, everybody, thanks for joining us for a deep dive spirituality conversation. Live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.
Amen.